The Day for Care and Support. The International Day for Care and Support is commemorated on 29th October. We want to have that discussion here in studio, and I am joined by Stanley Wambua. He's the head of gender statistics at Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And next to him is Oganga Cannibal. He is the program specialist, gender statistics advisor for UN Women. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, of course, this day is aimed to emphasize the importance of caregiving and recognizing the contributions of caregivers, of course, in the society. But I want to understand, this is the first time, Stanley, that we're having time use survey. What does time use survey mean to an ordinary Kenyan watching?
Okay, thank you. Time use survey is a household-based survey that are normally conducted to determine, on average, how much time do members of a household allocate and spend for various activities, daily activities. And in practice, we normally run a complete 24-hour schedule of recording exactly what activity an individual does.
Right.
Like, for example, if we begin at 4 a.m., then it has to go around until 4 a.m. But we normally collect data retrospectively, the last 24 hours, right? And therefore, once analyzed, we are able to determine the various activities that households or individuals undertake, how much of it takes how much time, what proportion of their time is spent on what activity between men and women, right? Yeah.
Right, just coming to you, Oganga, now, from what he's talked about, working with the UN Women, we'll get to the report and the findings, but what has been your experience like? What have you noted from the report that has just come out?
Yes, so thank you, Stanley, for defining what time use survey actually is. I think for UN Women, being the United Nations entity responsible for gender equality and empowerment of women, this report has been able to really give us the evidence to be able to understand, the disproportionate burden of unpaid care and domestic work, which is mainly, shouldered by women and girls. And so the report serves as a precursor or sets the stage for us then to be able to really get to understand that to what extent do we need to be able to mobilize or rally ourselves around supporting the national government to be able to come up with frameworks, like policies to be able to deal with some of those issues that really continue to perpetuate the existing gender inequalities that are occasioned by the very fact that women continue to undertake or to shoulder the burden of unpaid work, which again affects the ability to be able to be engaged in other more productive activities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before coming back to Stanley, just to you again, Oganga, just for someone to understand, how would you define care, domestic care and support? How would you define that?
Okay, so I think I would want to give it a perspective or contextualize it in the sense that for you to be able to understand, the scope of, unpaid care and domestic work, there are those frameworks, which have been developed by the United Nations Statistical Division called the System of National Accounts. This is a framework that is used to quantify the economic value of various activities within the national income account. And so I would start by, first of all, helping us to really get to understand that when you look at the intended, destination for production work, we have two sets of how we look at it. One is work that is done, for own use, and work that is done for others, And so within that, we again go to a notch higher to define the scope in terms of the forms of work that people, undertake. And within the forms of work, we have now the activities that my colleague has mentioned, which inform the production of either goods or services. And so then beyond that, for other forms of work, for work done for others, then you have the activities like employment and related activities, or unpaid trainee work. And then again, within that context, so these are the activities that form part of what we call the SNA production boundary, because these activities belong to the market economy. By the very nature of them, their transactional value that can be derived out of them. But then there are those activities that we call the unpaid household services, and so this is where we have the unpaid domestic services, for instance, preparation of meals, food management, cooking, and all that. And then we also have the unpaid caregiving services, for instance, like taking care of the children, looking after the elderly or the sick and all that. So beyond it, now when you go to the other side of it, in terms of now looking at the activities that fall within the general production boundary, where we have now the unpaid household services, like the examples I've just talked about, we have also the volunteer work. So within the scope of the volunteer work, of course, part of it, for those that are done to produce goods, they still fit in within the production boundary, the system of national accounts production boundary. But then those that are done, for providing services to other households, to the family members and also the community. So all those still form part of the unpaid, household services. And so we have a classification that has been provided to be able to classify these activities, for us to be able to identify them or get to understand their context. So we have, it's at 3-tier level. So the first tier is the major division level, where you have up to 9 major broad areas. And then we have again the second level, which is the divisions, and then the group level. So just like the framework that I've already explained the context, so then for those activities which have got the transactional value, which are produced for the market economy, so those are the activities we call the SNA productive activities. And that's where we have the employment and related activities, and also those that constitute production of goods for own final use by the household. And then now we come to the very activities that, as to why now we are commemorating this day, the unpaid household services, where we have at the major division level 3, that is the unpaid domestic services for the household and family members. And then we have also the unpaid caregiving services for the household and family members. And the last one is the unpaid volunteer work and also training work for the household and family members. And that is now outside the household. So so that is how I will try to give it a context. And also, of course, in a layman's term, if I now deviate from the technical explanation, we normally use the third-person criteria. So by this I mean that those activities that you cannot be able to delegate, and still be able to realize the same results. So those are the activities that then we are able to use that to demarcate the boundary between what are considered to be productive activities and those that are non-productive activities.
Thanks for that elaborate explanation. Stanley, coming to you now. One of the objectives of the survey was to identify gender difference in time use patterns. What has been your observation out of that?
Thank you. From the results, and especially when we look at the unpaid care and domestic work, we observe quite a large disparity in the amount of time spent on these activities between women and men. For instance, we'll find that women spend slightly more than 4 times what men spend on unpaid domestic and care work. And I think that's an area of concern. Across the spectrum, whether it's rural or it's urban, the pattern is still the same. Whether it is across the age, The young one, the girls, see, they spend much more time compared to boys. If you look at the elderly, likewise, the elderly above 65 years and above, you still find that older women spend slightly more than 3 times what men spend of the same age. And therefore, those are areas of concern, given that these are services, I can say, they have demand, but it's not a demand for the market. There's consumption of those services. But then you find that the burden is skewed, against one gender or one sex. And I think those are the areas that we take the position now to highlight them and, try to use these statistics to influence policies that can be able to mitigate and alleviate that burden on women. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting when you look at the report, women, like you said, it seems like it's skewed on one side. Coming to your Ganga now, women spend approximately 5 times as much as men on unpaid domestic care. That's a bit big. And working women spend 3 hours, 18 minutes. Why is that the case?
I think this is the very reason as to why, even when you look at the call by the Sustainable Development Goals, that is SDG 5.4, which calls for nations to recognize and value unpaid domestic work. And so, again, I would also like to make reference to the International Conference for Labor Statisticians, which in 2013 was able to, make a call or a resolution that unpaid work is indeed work. And so you realize that some of the, discriminatory kind of practices in terms of the social norms and also the gender stereotypes that over time have continued, to, perpetuate the existing inequalities in terms of assigning, the gender roles, where you'll find that mostly the women would be expected to be able to, bear the brunt of undertaking the unpaid work, just in the context of what I'd already alluded to, continues to really, exacerbate the extent to which women continue to, get disadvantaged. Because, for instance, you realize that the unpaid work makes women to lose, the opportunities in terms of being able to engage, in the productive work, like, public life or furthering their education and the like. And so this is one of the reasons as to why it's really important that one of the statistics that I really like in terms of, the gender analysis that KNBS undertook, to be able just to, give us a perspective that beyond the fact that, women continue to, shoulder the burden of unpaid work, even for those women who I would say that are already, involved in paid work, they still continue, to be able to involve themselves in undertaking the unpaid work. And so these are some of the things that then we need to be able to, reduce some of these practices by working with the government to be able to come up with the legal frameworks, and even policies to be able to really help us to understand as a society, to recognize that, for one, the role that women play in terms of doing the unpaid work is significant in terms of the well-being of the family, and also, secondly, even in terms of the need to be able to support the government to continue providing the evidence, to enable us to really measure and see that beyond the interventions that are being put in place with support from the development partners like UN Women, to what extent are we, trying to reduce the burden of unpaid work, and even go beyond and also, work around with the communities, and various partners to just ensure that the redistribution, of the responsibilities that are tied around the unpaid work. Yes.
You said unpaid work is indeed work. So coming to you, Stanley, from collecting and gathering data, was there at any point that there's a bit of stereotype you know, when you go to collect the data, that, you know, this kind of work that's done is not actually work or is actually work? Did you get that form of discrimination, if I could put?
Yeah, no, not when we are collecting data, because, okay, we are aware of such stereotypes, and therefore, from design, we try to design instruments that are neutral. They do not depict that to a person who is answering, so that we get as accurate as possible what exactly did you do, all right? Then, from the analysis, you will see now certain patterns, you know, coming out. And therefore, because, for example, like you would find that there is quite a wide range of perceptions about it. Even though, for example, like we feel that both women and men, and we do actually encourage both women and men to participate together in these household chores. It is something good, all right, and enjoyable. In an African setting, do you think that's possible? Yes, it is possible. It is possible because we've come a long way, and therefore, there are those who feel, even women, there are women who feel that these are jobs and tasks for women because of the cultural background. The others who are more liberal. But since we live, you know, culture is very strong. Culture really influences how we do things, and we cannot take it for granted. And therefore, because if let's say in a community, they have done things this way for centuries, you know, it's not something that will just come all of a sudden and change. And therefore, when we are collecting the data, one of the strategies that we normally do is to train data collectors to ensure that you collect data in a manner that only the truth comes to the fore. By making the questions very simple, by you know, creating convenient time slot to enable an individual remember, like 1 hour. You ask them, what did you do between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m.? So you allow them to give you the information. I cooked, I did this, you record. All right? Then at analysis, I said, that is now where the real, you know, the real stuff come out. And we're able to know that either women do spend much more, allocate and spend much more time on this type of activities, and men allocate and spend much more time on the ones where they are paid, all right? Right. The students that are paid, you find more men there. When it comes to things like, let's say, like personal care, there is not much difference between men and women, but still you find men spend slightly more time, slightly. It's no significant difference. But when it comes to, let's say, the domestic chores, the care chores, then women really spend much more time there. And therefore, I think in the interest of the quality of the data, that's why we suppress that. But if we were to go, for example, like undertake further studies, further research, for example, the type of research that would be now determining, you know, additional information as to why is it like this, then that one would model slightly different. Because like here, we really wanted to quantify, one, the proportion of time spent on each activity that they do, and then in 2 ways, by the entire study population and also by those that participate in those activities. And then later on in analysis, we do also compute the participation rates, and we also see, for example, who is participating in which activity, and who is not participating in which activity. Again, so that is, I think, so far as the data collection is concerned, that's how it goes. Yeah. Coming to you now, Uganga, I mean, still on the same. Yeah.
I wanted to add a bit on what my colleague has just talked to. Again, the way the tool is designed, when at the point of data collection, you really identify the respondents, and not by the fact that either someone is a man or a woman, but these responses are just randomly picked, and the tool, the set of questions are just in terms of describing, the activities that you're involved in, how long did you, spend your time on doing those activities, and then the context. So we have the context variables where you're able to also find out like these activities, for whom are they done, and when they are being done by the respondent, who is accompanying them or who is with them, and then the location of where they are doing those activities, and also whether those activities are for pay or for profit. And then lastly, we also, beyond the description, then we use the international classification for time use statistics, whereby then we are able to classify those activities. And I think that is now when thereafter, at the analysis point, then you are able to classify and identify the activities that are paid and those that are form part of unpaid work.
One of the findings that I found a bit fascinating is elderly women aged 65 plus, they spend about 2 hours 54 minutes on unpaid care, compared to men who spend only 48 minutes. What was the situation with that?
I'd like to say that one, I still go back to the fact that the very nature of the social norms, and some of the gender stereotypes, the moment they are not, dealt with, in terms of trying to break some of those structural barriers that continue to hinder women from, being empowered. So this therefore means that the woman in her entire life cycle, she continues, to get disadvantaged. Yeah, because for instance, I would say that when you look at some of these gender roles, definitely if nothing is done, in terms of trying to reduce them or deal with them, then that burden of unpaid work, it doesn't change.
Right.
In terms of being lessened on the shoulder of the women and girls. So again, when that continues to be there, the unpaid work, this burden then again has an effect in terms of continuing to, discriminate the woman and the women and the girls from being able to, get themselves into employment, participate in public life, and even further their education. So therefore, that means that if you look at even in terms of life expectancy, you'll realize that from the analytical report on, one of the analytical reports produced by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics on gender dimensions revealed that women in Kenya outlive men by 6 years. So again, looking at the issue around the skip generation, whereby you still find that older women continue to still, live with their grandchildren. And so when that continues, so that's then how you continue to see, those inequalities, being perpetuated and remaining evident across the life cycle of the woman in terms of those responsibilities still continuing being, to be being done by them.
Right. I want to just give you a minute maybe just to tell us, respond to that before we take a break.
Okay. No, that's very true. Women who are 65 years plus, they were girls 45 years ago.
Right.
And the situation was much worse than it is now. All right? Because the levels of education then for the girl child were very low.
True.
Today, things have improved. At least the gender parity in enrollment, primary and secondary school now is good, it's actually achieved. And therefore, as I said earlier, cultural issues don't change overnight. And therefore, you find a woman who is 70 years, it is actually in her system to do these things. Really. And therefore, but therefore, when we start targeting change, we expect that progressively, if intervention are put and sustained, progressively it is something that is actually achievable to achieve gender equality in some of these areas. And then the other thing is, which has been coming through, is also a level of education. For the older women, as I said, they weren't accessing education at the same level with men. And therefore, with the time, in terms of skill development, instead of marketability of the knowledge that they have, you find that their labor is not very migratory as compared to men. And they ended up taking up chores at the homestead area, all right?
So it's easy for them to pick up.
Yeah. And that's why you find the same trend continuing even for older women who are 65 plus.
Right.
And actually, ideally, even all the way from 60 upward, you find it's the same pattern. And I think, therefore, going forward, the game changer is to recognize that unpaid care and domestic work is actually work, and then sustain interventions sustain them for quite a long time. Therefore, we'll be able to make progress by and large.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Of course, the conversation here is on the International Day for Care and Support, investing in care for accelerated gender equality and sustainable development. Right, we're taking a short commercial break. We'll be back with more. Stay with us.